Hello and welcome to episode 15 of my series building through the terrain tutorials in Battle Games in Middle-earth, the classic magazines from many years ago. If you're not yet a subscriber and you do enjoy these videos, then please do subscribe. It's wonderful to see how many of you are enjoying them, and once you have, don't forget to ding the bell and click all so that then YouTube will tell you whenever one of my videos goes live. Now this week I'm going to be building Rocky Outcrops. That's the subject. Done this a few times, done a few different terrain tutorials already, even in this series, which show off some of the Rocky Outcrops. So what I'm going to do is build the instructions as they are in the magazine, as traditional, and then I've got an idea for something a little bit more special that I might do for the rest of the video. Though my time is massively constrained suddenly. I started a new job today and now I know I have to go away a bit for work in a couple of weeks' time, and that means that this video and the next video is going to all have to be done in the next 10 days. So we shall see how that impacts this productivity and how that impacts this video and the next. But I'm going to crack on and see where I can get to. So without wasting any more of my time now, or your time when you watch this, let's get the camera pointed down at the bench, have a look at the tutorial and get started. So here we are, outcrops and ridges. The lands of Middle-earth are vast and wild, with rocky outcrops and ridges jutting from the ground. From the rocky hills around Amansul and Moriah to the rough terrain of Rohan, these features are a common sight. There we are. So in this PAX modelling workshop we show you the simple techniques needed to build some rocky outcrops for your battle games. Those outcrops appear throughout Middle-earth and are used in our battle reports, page 6 to 13, to represent some of the natural rocky formations of Rohan. The techniques used for making hills in PAX 4's modelling workshop are the starting point for outcrops, with polystyrene the main material used. We find condensed pink polystyrene, or just styrene, the most suitable for this kind of modelling project because it is tougher and less flaky than regular white polystyrene. You will also need plenty of stones, gravel and sand. So yes, what it says there is don't use the white bubbly stuff, use XPS, which is what I call it here. It's insulation foam. We use it on the outside of the building, and so I've got lots of it lying around. So what you'll need for this is PVA glue, always, modelling flock, always, a large paintbrush, a craft knife, green, brown, black and white acrylic paint, junior hacksaw, coarse sandpaper, a sheet of condensed polystyrene or XPS, some small stones and gravel, modelling sand and a marker pen. So let's have a quick read through what the instructions are, and I think that I'll skip step 1. I won't film it because this one has been covered as it says in PAX 4, which was video 3 in this series for me. Step 1, the basic hill. The hill forms the base of the model and is made in exactly the same way as the one in PAX 4's modelling workshop, or video 3 in this series for me. To recap, draw a rough circular shape on a sheet of condensed polystyrene. It can be any size you like, although we chose to make ours about 24 centimetres or 9.5 inches in diameter. Once you've drawn the circle, carefully cut it out using a junior hacksaw. Make sure you do this over a sheet of newspaper in a well-ventilated area, as sawing polystyrene creates lots of mess and dust. Now you don't need to use a junior hacksaw. You can use a kitchen knife, which is a much better idea, or you can use a hot wire cutter, which also needs to have well-ventilated space. So those are your other options there. Angle the sides by sawing a rough slope all the way around with the saw and then sand down the edges. This time, however, only sand about 2/3 of the way around the hill, leaving part of it rough. Keep some of the offcuts of styrene handy, as they will be useful later to make rocks and rubble. So I will get that stage done. It's the same thing, so I won't be filming as I go, and I will come back in to do step 2, which is preparing the outcrop, when I'm ready for that. So get your hill done and join me in a minute for the next step. There we are. I had a scrap bit of green foam, green XPS laying around that has been cluttering up the place for a while, so I thought I'd use that. So I've cut a shape out and I'm pretty happy with how that shape looks. So now we're going to move on to step 2, which is where we're going to start following the specific instructions. Preparing the outcrop. The rough section of the hill will be covered in rocks and other texture, but first it needs a little preparation. Mark out the area where you want to place your textured materials. I have my pen. In our example, you can see that we extended the rough area onto the top of the hill. So my rough area is already a little bit rough, you can see here, and I'm going to do it in this region here. I've left it as quite a cliff as well, which is interesting. Using a craft knife, make lots of little scores all over this area. With your fingers or even a fork, pull out the scored bits of polystyrene, leaving a rough surface that is indented into the hill. So let's get that done. I'm going to do now, first of all, mark out where I want my rough area to be. And it's going to be coming up like this, going across the top and coming down there. So next up, what we're going to do is we're going to start scoring. Now the way the picture shows is literally just doing this, and it says keep your fingers out of the way. If you need to be told to keep your fingers out of the way of a knife, then I don't know. But do, keep your fingers out of the way. Don't cut your fingers while you're doing this. That would be very silly. So, and it seems to suggest lots and lots and lots of little cuts. So let's just get this done. I'm now going to grab myself some paper to put underneath this so that I don't make so much of a mess. I'll be back very shortly. There we are, that's better. And that's not going to make as much mess, but it'll be a bit easier for me to tidy up. So what I'm now going to do is, as it suggests, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to start tearing these out. Now it might be that I do need to get myself a fork, which will mean I'll have to go downstairs because I don't have one up here. Yeah, I think I am. It's quite tough, this XPS. Or I could simply use my knife again to help me dig it out, which is what I probably will do. So I'll put some music on because this isn't going to sound very nice, and you can watch as this develops. So there we are, that step is done. I'm now going to tidy up and we'll move on to the next stage. So now, step 3, adding the texture. Take some of the larger stones and leftover pieces of styrene. I've literally just been outside and picked these up. And these are actually lumps of concrete because we're doing a renovation, and they're lighter than stones, so they're going to be better. And you use PVA glue to stick them onto the rough area. You will need to let this to dry for at least an hour before adding the rest of the texture. So we're going to get this done. I also have some pieces of styrene here and here which I can use, so I'm going to be able to select quite a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to blob some PVA on and start sticking things down, like so. There we are. Stick the PVA on and drop a stone in place. And you can see that I'm actually going a little bit over. I'm not going to use that one, I'm going to use that one. I'm going a little bit over the edge that I've roughed up because I think that'll be how I want it to be. So you can do what you want. This is something to bear in mind. Ain't no one's telling you what to do, it's all just an idea. Yeah, I don't like that one. That one, there we are. Nice blob of PVA in there. Let's get some more styrene in maybe as well. Put some there. Drop that on there. And then got another piece here. That can go there. There we are. So we've got some nice large pieces of rock. I'm going to get some of these smaller bits as well. And scatter them over this edge here. So put some more in there. There we are. So hopefully that will dry. I'm going to leave that now for about an hour or so and get stuck into something else. And when I come back, I'll do the rest of the texturing. So there we are. That is the beginning of step 3. So leave that to dry until they're secure, and then come in and do the rest of the texturing. So I'll be back. There we are. I'll be back when I'm ready to do that. So while that's drying, let's get started on the more advanced build, and this is going to be crazily more advanced. So, regular viewers of this channel, or people who've watched a few of my videos, will recognise this. This is the white tower that I made. It's got a backstory, and it's going to become something which will be reappearing throughout my channel for a while to come as I continue to develop it. It's certainly is a standalone piece. As you can see, you can put it on the battlefield like this and it looks quite cool. It's more than quite cool. I'm very, very proud of it. It looks amazing. But what my concept is that it should be sitting on top of a hill. and potentially should have multiple layers. So while it will be sitting on top of a hill and you can use it just as on top of a hill, you will also be able to lift this off and have rooms inside and underneath, cellars and what have you, potentially have a separate access from one side. And that's what I'm going to attempt to do. The reason I'm doing it as part of this video is because you can see here we've got a cliff. This is going to be quite a prominent feature of it. It's going to have quite a lot of cliffs along this edge here, while it's going to go away much more smoothly over towards this side of the build as well. And it's probably going to have an artificial end cut off at one end just while I'm doing this, which I will then eventually fill in with more hills that will be able to butt up, and maybe I'll use some templates for that, and magnets for that, and have it so it's much more of a modular build. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the next layer down. So that's going to be cliffs at this side, a slope at this side, and when you lift it off, you'll be able to see that there's the building continues below the ground. That's it. That's it. I'm already under pressure for time, and I've decided to pick up one of the larger items that I have on my desk to do. So anyway, onwards. First thing to do is to draw around this so that I know where the template is, so where this is going to sit. What I'll then be able to do is cut out the area of where the building is going to go and have that come through on this board and potentially onto the one below, and then I'll be able to put rooms inside of it. But this whole thing will basically sit on top of this sheet of XPS, maybe dipped in a little bit so that the rim is not quite so egregious as it is at the moment. So I might trim out a little bit around this template area, but the template area is where this is going to be sat on, and then you'll have the hole in the middle. So first of all, let's draw around that. Okay, so I've drawn around that, and I've marked out where the extent of the cliffs currently is, and also where this track is, because that track's going to lead off down there. So I'm going to move the camera very slightly, because what I'm about to do is going to get in the way of the camera. So I'll just shift that around, and then we'll continue with this work. There we are. So that's the outline done, as I said, so I can move that out of the way when I'm ready. And what I'm going to do now is sketch in where I want this track to go. So my concept is it's going to kind of like lead off in that direction. Now this is just rough, but it's just to give me that idea of where the contour is going to be, because what this is now going to do is I'm now going to move the castle out of the way and the white tower out of the way, and we're going to draw in where the rest of this cut is going to be on this sheet. So I'll just pop this down over here, and what you can see is we have our cliffs here. So our cliffs are going to probably want to let's do it with a pencil before we put it in with pen. So our cliffs are going to want to we're going to want to extend our cliffs out here. And then what we're going to do is go like that, because that will then allow us, when we come to do our next terrain tile over here, to extend the hill, then it'll butt up against that. So this is cliffs, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend the cliffs further around to about over here, I think. And we're going to actually extend the cliffs all the way here. So on this bit curves down, so we're going to extend it just a little bit, but not much, and then we'll have cliffs all the way around there. Because then what that will do, may become a little bit wider as we come round, but that is all going to be cliffs. And then what will happen is this board will then start to smooth out. Yeah, this then will start to smooth out, and it will open out like so. So it will be smooth. So this is where the cliffs will roughly end, and it will smooth down out there. So you'll be able to approach from here and be able to approach from here. And along here, we will just have that as a squared off. So that's where my extent of my board is going to be. It's a big board. Good thing I've got a lot of space. So, but we will be having cliffs from here, roughly to here roughly, all the way around. So a nice load of cliffs and then sloping ground here. Slope that off a bit as well, and then have the path coming down here and have all this textured. So the next thing for me to do is going to be to measure on this board here, on the old building. Let me pick it up again. I'm going to need to measure on the building the location of the building, of the current walls. So find out where they are in terms of distance from each of these points, mark that off on this, and then transfer and cut that through so that we have the footprint of the building on this template here. So I'm going to get that done, and I will be back to show you how that looks when I've finished it. That was actually pretty challenging, but I've done it. So what I need to do now is actually take the other two away from underneath this, which I forgot to do before I started shooting, so I'll just do that now. There we are. And what we've got here is we have the walls, the extent of the outside walls of the building above. I got the same size tube as I've used to make the tower, and I've traced that around, and I've got this other piece of cardboard here which I'm going to be able to use as the inside walls. So that's cool, I can make use of that. And this is where, like I say, the extent of the building is above ground. Now, one thing to bear in mind is you don't have to limit the extent of the building above ground and make it only at the same size as below ground. So that may be what I do. I might extend it a bit. But first of all, I'm going to cut out this shape that I have here, because I think I may use air dry clay to build the walls back up anyway if I do stick to exactly the same size. And if I don't, then I can always just fill it in or whatever. But this is the first cut I'm going to make, and I hope it's not a mistake. So I've got my Stanley knife. And you can see I made a few mistakes here. It's the outer one that I want to do. So we're going to start cutting. And there we have it. We have our beginnings of our cellar. So the next step that's going to be needed is I'm going to need to shave off just the beginning of just the top of this, so that this actually has a little notch to sit in. But I'm going to leave that not to do next. I'm probably going to cut out the rest of the shape and then contour down, and then once I've got that done, then I can take this down a very, very small amount more, and that will give me that little lip to sit in. I also need to transfer this shape onto the next two boards, because if you take a miniature, I've got one of my battle companies here, you can see he's going to bang his head if he goes into that little cellar thing. So I'm going to also do at least one more layer, if not two more layers, with the same cutout, and then what I'll be doing is gluing it all together, and that's where I'm going to aim to get to tonight. So cut this shape out, transfer it to the other shapes, other boards, and cut them out and then glue them together, and that's where I'm going to leave it to go off overnight. So I'm going to get all of that done, and I'll bring you back when I come to the gluing stage. So there we are, I've managed to get that cut out. I've got the shape out in the middle, and I've got the rough outline of where the board's going to go, and you can see that I've also done a little bit of a contour along that end. This is where the cliff is. What I'm going to do now is stick this together using gator glue here, and my gator glue, so that'll be nicely done, and that will be dried by tomorrow. And then when that's done, I will then come in and I will do my texturing, so my contouring of where the path is going to go and how this is going to slope down. So it's going to slope down basically in this direction, but I do need it to be dry. I do need it to be glued before I do that, I think, so I can cut it all as one, which is going to be a bit of fun. This is also going to be contoured a little bit better, and it's also going to be contoured at this edge, but it's going to end up with an artificial step, and that's just how it is, because I'm going to need to do another tile to go next to it, which I will then clip together or put some magnets in, as I've said. So all I'm not going to worry about that for now. I'm going to get this exactly how I want to, and then I'll marry that one up when I come to it, which might be a bad idea, might not be a bad idea, whatever. That's what I'm going to do. So what I'm going to do now is glue this together and then leave it to dry, put weights on it, leave it to dry overnight. So I will come back probably tomorrow when I'm taking the weights off, because yeah, you've all seen glue being applied. Just put it on, weight it down and leave it. It's the morning after, and I can see from one place there with some bleed that the glue is now very dry, and you can see just how many weights I ended up putting on this just to make sure it's fully weighted down. I like using a variety of weights. I have some big rocks that I've got from the garden, some actual barbell weights, these big metal plates that are good as well, and then also these which are weights from a lifting machine. So I'll take those off now and we'll check how well it's glued down. There we are. That looks pretty solid. I'm pretty pleased with that. Next steps will be to clear up. You could just see inside there. Oh, sorry, you can't see it because I lifted it too high. But there's a little bit of overspill just there, but I can't see any more anywhere else, which is good. So the next thing to do, there's two steps I'm going to do for next. First of all, I'm going to shave down all of the actual contouring that I want. And then I'm going to put it on a hardboard base, not a plywood, because that will just be unnecessary. This is very, very solid, but I think a hardboard will do. So when I'm ready to do that, I will invite you along. Next, I'm going to do the next step on the official build. Okay, now for the next part of step 3. Once the large stones are fairly secure, and you can see that these large stones are fairly secure, cover all the rough area with PVA glue, leaving only the rocks showing. Sprinkle small pieces of gravel and some of the offcuts from step 2 all over the glue. This represents the loose stones or scree that occur naturally on outcrops. Finally, liberally sprinkle sand over the whole area to fill in the gaps. Rather than shake off the excess now, leave the model to dry first. Gravel is quite heavy, and if you shake the outcrop straight away, some of it will fall off. So that's what we're going to do. What I've got here is I have some of the smaller offcuts. I'll take some of the bigger ones out of the way from yesterday, and I have 2 different sizes of gravel. I have some number 4 and I have some number 3. And then down here, just waiting for you to pick up, I have even smaller number 2 and number 1. So I will now get this done. I'll pop some music on and you can watch. Interestingly enough, the glue from last night still isn't all dry, which shows I put way too much on. So this time I've got an old brush so that I can spread it around. So we're just going to put the glue on, and then what we'll do is we'll spread it around once I've applied it. And then we will scatter the gravel and other bits and pieces all over it. So I'll get this done and I'll put some music on and you can watch as this develops. There we are. Let me zoom that in. And you can see there that that is covered. It's got big rocks that I did last night. It's got some intermediate sized rocks. Some of the offcuts of the XPS have worked quite nicely for that. And then I did builder sand number 4 and number 3 and number 2. I haven't put gravel on the actual sand on number 1 because I'll probably use that for the texture on the rest of it, so it'll be a bit odd. But that didn't take too long. The whole clip's less than 8 minutes as I stand here. So yeah, pretty pleased with that. I'm going to leave that to dry all day, and then I'll be back later for the next step now to tidy up. So I've finally got time to have a quick look at this just at the end of my lunch break, and I have a hacksaw. So I used to have a single-handed, like a hacksaw, where it would join at one end and you could use it as a knife, which was very good. And I wish that I had a longer kitchen knife than I have. The kitchen knife that I have, which I'm going to start work with, is not all that long. But I want to use the knife because rather than the Stanley knife, because cutting through the glue I used is not actually the easiest thing in the world. Now I'm probably not going to film all of this because it's going to be quite a complicated process. And it's going to require lots of shifting around and all that stuff. But what I thought I'd do is I'd start off just at this end and start carving down so you can see what I'm aiming for. So if I briefly lift that in place, you can see that this now sits very nicely on top there. And what we're going to do is the cliff is going to basically start a little bit further away here, and this area is also going to be cliff, and it's also back here going to start to contour more smoothly from this point. So I will move that slightly out of the way, but I'll still leave it so I can refer to it. I'll put it at this end. And what I'll be doing is coming in with the knife and I'll be doing a lot of that. Okay, now I'm not too worried about the bobbliness because I will be covering this over with Luke's APS modelling compound, though the reason for that is because I'm sawing with a saw-edged knife. But this is going to be a very messy process, as you can see. So I'm going to get myself a bin bag in a second so I can put things straight into the bin bag, and as I need to do bigger cuts I can make use of the hacksaw, but most of the time I'm going to be trying to use this kitchen knife. So I'll stop filming now just because it's going to get very messy, and I'll bring you back at the end when I've finished doing all of the contouring. I was carving away with that kitchen knife and I thought, you know what, this mess, which was really bad, is just way too much. I can't deal with it. So I've got my Stanley knife out, put it to the longest extent, and it's working a lot better. It just is better with a very sharp, thin knife. As you can see, it carves through much easier and it doesn't cause all that bobbling, which was just doing my head in, and I've swept and it's still all over the place. So I think this is how I'm going to be doing it from now on. So by all means, if you've got a good kitchen knife, a thin one, a thin bladed one, then that can be a good option. But I'm going to stick with this Stanley knife. It certainly is giving me a better result than the kitchen knife was. So again, I'm not going to run the camera for too long because this is going to be messy. But you can see just how much better that is. Getting a better result, a cleaner cut, a smoother cut, and much less mess. And some mess I like. I mean, I don't mind sticking my hand in like plaster or whatever. That's good mess. But this stuff, it's basically it sticks to you because it's got static. That's what I was looking for. So anyway, I'm going to get on with this, and I will show you what it looks like when it's done. There we are, I'm pretty happy with that now. So what we've got is we've got the slope coming up the back. We've got a bit of a slope here, which may need a little bit more work on it, but that's fine for now. Then we've got this path coming down around here. We've got a little bit of an access up here, and we've got an even steeper access up here. And then a little bit of a ridge coming out here. So it's going to be a really nice looking terrain piece. And if I put the existing one on, you can see just how nicely that fits in with the track here. And then this is going to basically have a little bit of a shaving off maybe, but once I've done the cliff, it might end up having nothing. So I'm just leaving that for now. But I'm really pleased with that. So the next step is to put a base on it, and I'm going to use just hardboard. Some very thin hardboard I've got. So I'm not going to be able to film that because of limitations of... actually, you know what? So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a hardboard base on it. So I'll bring you along for as much of that as I can. I'm not sure how much of it I'm going to be able to film, but yeah, it's going to basically be a base which I'll draw around this entire thing, cut it out with a jigsaw, and then stick it on using the gator glue again, and then leave that. That'll have to be done. Well, that'll be where I have to get to for today. So yeah, pleased with the progress so far, and I'm hoping that I will get this done in time. Go big or go home, right? Well, I'm going big because I'm already at home. I actually went downstairs to have a look at the hardboard, and I found that I had an offcut of plywood which was almost exactly the right size, and just to fit in with the other build I figured, you know what, I'm going to do this with plywood. So I've just cut that out, which was a lot of fun, and what I'm now going to do is glue this down with gator glue. Now I'm not going to do this on camera because I'm not going to glue it in this location. I'm going to take it downstairs and weight it because I need to have this space for other things while this is drying. But that's going to look great, so I'll be able to put my walls in here when this is done, texture the floor, and then cover the whole lot with Luke's APS's modelling compound. And yeah, we're looking okay at the moment in terms of hitting the target. So yeah, pleased with that. I'm going to get that glued down now, and then move on to the next step, probably on the official build. This is all now nicely dried, so what I'm going to do is get my black paint that I use, and I'm going to apply the undercoat over all of the outcrop. So this is step 4. Once the PVA is dried and you have shaken off the excess sand, it's time to paint the model. Undercoat the textured area with thinned down black paint. Again, styrene will melt if you use spray undercoat, so it's best to paint it on by hand with a large brush. Then it says paint the smooth areas of the outcrop green. Now I just don't do that. I will be doing my usual texturing over the rest of the model. But what I'll be doing now is I've got a brush. It's not the biggest brush, but it's one I want to use, and I'm going to paint all of this with black paint. Not too watered down, but using water to help it sink into the gaps. So what I'm doing is I'm dipping this into the paint, then dipping it into my water, and that is just giving just enough. You can see some of the stuff isn't perfectly stuck yet, but this will provide a little bit more security, and we'll hopefully glue those things in place, the ones that are loose. So I'll get this done, stick some music on, get this done as quick as I can, and you'll see how well this works or not doesn't work just when I find out as well. Yeah, so that's painted on. Didn't take too long. And that probably won't take too long to dry. You'll notice a few bits fell off, or I pushed them off because they annoyed me, or I just didn't like how they looked, which is absolutely fine. And what you'll see is that I've not just painted the area which I put the scatter on, but I've also painted the front, because I'm going to do the carved rock face there as well, which is kind of what I've done. So that's one of the alternate approaches that it suggests. So I've done two techniques in one on here. So I'm going to wash my hands, clean up, and let that to dry. Yesterday evening I came in and I did a little bit more black on this because there was a few gaps, but that's now done. So what I'm going to do next is the next stage, which is painting the model. Once the textured area is dry brush with a grey paint. So you've seen this before many times. I've got my slightly darker grey paint. We're going to take most of the paint off, but not all of it, and we're going to come along and we're going to dry brush over all of this area. I can remember the first time I ever dry brushed, I was just so amazed at what a difference such a simple technique makes to something like this. Amazing that you don't have to do. I mean, just the difference in like seconds is incredible. There we are. So we'll do a couple of dry brushes of that, and then we'll come in with the lighter grey in a minute. And that's done. It's dry brushed. So the next step will be for me to do my brown terrain paint and sand mix on this. So I'll be back very shortly when I've tidied this up and I'm ready to do that. Okay, so I have my big pot of terrain paint here, which there's a link in the description of this video of how to make this, but simply is paint and water with some dish washing up liquid in it. And I need to open it. There we are. And down here, just off to the side, I have my finest sifted sand. And I'm going to use the same paintbrush because why wouldn't I? And what we'll do is you paint the entire area that you want to be done, and do it in sections, so don't try and do it all at once. You'll find it's much better to do it in sections. And you might find it's better to do it with a smaller brush than this, I think, because we don't really want to have drips like that. So in a second I will grab a smaller brush, but I will now scatter my sand over this section, and it is as simple as that. There we are. Done. And as quick as that was, we now empty that off, and that's that process done. So I will grab a slightly smaller brush so that I can do a little bit more detail. I'll touch up these areas that I missed then because the brush was too big. There we are. And then chuck the sand on it, reuse this stuff that's here, and now let's do the rest of the model. And there we are, that's done. So let that dry now, and then we'll come back and flock. It's a little bit later on in the day, a couple of hours, and that now is dry and it's ready now for the final step, which is called finishing touches, step 6. This has been a really quick build. Give the smooth green area, well, when it's not smooth and green, it's got sand on it, but whatever. A thin coat of PVA glue and cover it in flock in the usual way. You can add extra details to the hill, such as long grass made from brush bristles and undergrowth made from pan scarers. A few washes of green and brown paint applied sparingly on the rocks can create a very realistic effect. So I'm going to do that. So first of all, what I've got to do is I have my PVA here, and I have a couple of these are shop bought flocks as it happens. So a dark and a light one, and I have my little pot here which has my cut up paint bristles, and what I don't have is my pan scarers, so I'm just going to go and grab them and I'll be back in a second. There we are. Now I have my couple of scraps of pan scarer that were cut from a previous build. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the pan scarers in, because then I can flock and do the long grasses around where they are sat. So for this I have my strong scissors here, and I will probably put some butting up against the edge of the rocky area in quite a similar way to what they show in the magazine. If you have the magazine, you'll see that. But straight lines are inimical in nature, so we're going to want to cut it out in a wavy way and take these straight lines off of it so that it doesn't look too artificial. There we are. So there we have, and that will be able to sit nicely in there, and we can potentially pull it a bit to make it a little bit more 3D, like so. Just put it apart, and then that can now sit nicely in there as a bit of a interesting feature. So I will glue that down in a second. Of course, the other way that you can go with pan scourers is to pull them off the back of those foam scrubbing brushes, which is what I also do, because I use the foam scrubbing brushes to make up my own clump foliage. So that's also an idea. If you don't have access to these, once a sponge has become too old and knackered for you to use it to actually clean your pots, just put it in a box, wait for it to dry obviously completely, put it in a pot, and then you can use the scrubbing side for this, and you can use the sponge side to make clump foliage, which is pretty cool. So I think that's enough. I don't actually need all of the stuff that I brought, but that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to glue that down, and then I will continue and we'll put the flocks over it. So that will be done using a large brush again, probably the same large brush, so I don't have to worry about being quite so accurate. So here is the same brush as I used before, and what we'll do is we'll paint glue on and then paint it over the top, and that will then dry. If you can get that to soak, that's even better. There we are, soak that in, and that will then dry nicely in place and will be hard to touch, which means it won't get damaged while you're playing, which is a very good thing. So once I've got these in, I will then do the flocking, and I'll put some music on. You've seen it before. What I do the dark then the light, so I do it two, or if I'm doing two colours, often I'll do three colours. So I'll put some music on, and what we'll do now is we will put the flock over, and then after that I'll do the brushes. So let's get started. So there you are, that's now that done. So the final step for this part, and actually for basically finishing the build according to them, though I will be putting another coat of PVA over the top of the flock just to hold it in place, is to put some of these old brush bristles in place. Now they're a bit long at the moment. They're probably too long for the build that I want. So what I'm going to do is, with the same sharp knife as I used for cutting the green scouring pad, I'm just going to trim the tops off, and then I'll put some neat PVA in a blob, like so, and then look to stand it up. And it will stand up because it's going to lean against the rocks next to it. If I'm looking at making these stand up, actually stand up, then normally what I'll do is I'll use super glue gel, because that's the best thing to do for making sure things actually stand up. They may even be a little long for there, so I might actually move them to a different place and put some shorter ones in there. What I'm aware of is that I don't want to have this getting damaged with being used. So putting these next to a taller rock is going to keep them a little bit safer from being knocked. Though of course now they're probably not going to stand up as well as they did. So there we are. So let's get a shorter bit and stick it in there, and then I'm going to call that done, which is a good name for anything really. So I'll put a short one there. And like I say, what I might do actually is look at putting that in with PVA, with super glue. We'll see whether it sticks well or not. So I'll let that dry, and I'll be back later with the absolute final steps, which will be a last coat of the scenic glue. Now it is time for me to start working on the cliffs for this part of the build, which I'm very excited about. I've also been having a lot of thoughts regarding how I'm going to do the lip, which I'll come to later. I'm still kind of thinking about it, but I have had some ideas. So what I have is a big box of bark, which is just bark I've picked up. We have wood burners, and so this is all just bark that I've got from wood for our fire. Let me just pop these lights on. There we are. And I've just saved it. I've had this quite a long time. It's all very, very dry wood, and it got fantastic textures. This is how I do most of my cliffs. Fantastic textures, interesting holes. It's just perfect, really. It does require some work because you have to break it and you have to fit it in place. So it's not necessarily as quick maybe as hacking away at it with a knife, painting it and be done with it. But I think it's worth the extra effort for the results that you get. So what I'm going to do now, and I might leave the camera running or I might turn it off after a little while because it might get a bit too much, is I'm going to go through my little box of tricks here, and I'm going to pick out the sections of bark. As you can see, that fits there very, very nicely, and clamp it in and it'll hold in place nicely. So I'm going to go through my box of tricks of bark here, and any that I find that's going to fit I will be gluing in with my gator glue, which works really, really well for this as well. So let's get started. I'll pop some music on and you can watch as I probably get in the way of the camera a bit, which I'll apologise for in advance. But yeah, this is the next and the most time-consuming, or not, no, the second most time-consuming task left for finishing this build. Onwards. I think that's about enough to do for now. I'll let that dry. It only takes about an hour for the glue to go off, if that. And then I'll be able to move everything around a bit more, get a bit more access. As you can see, the biggest challenge of this is clamping rather than finding rock that looks good. You need to remember that, of course, that all raised rock faces are not just in one direction. They move around, and so having bits that go up and bits that go at different angles makes it look a lot more realistic. So I'm going to leave that now, step away, come back to it when I'm after dinner maybe. I've run out of time as well anyway for what I've got. So yeah, I'll leave that now, but I'm pleased with how that's going on. I can't wait to see what it looks like when it's finished. I've done a couple of bits without the camera being on just because I've been pottering, and as I've seen something that will work, I've grabbed it and used it. But so I've made a little bit more progress since the last time I shot, including this bit here, which should now be dry. Yep, it dries so quickly, that stuff. I love it, it's so good to use. So I'm now in the final stage. I've got a little bit here and a little bit here to do, and then I've got to fill in under here. But I'm very, very close to complete, as you can see. So what I'm going to be doing is putting in these last few pieces, letting them to dry, and then it will be a case of coming in with the Luke's APS's modelling compound and finishing it all off. Now some of these are overhanging the bottom of the piece of the plywood, and I'll probably get my Dremel out and do that, but that will have to be done tomorrow because now Rosie's in bed, if not asleep. She was asleep, apparently she's woken up, so I don't want to disturb her, clearly. So I'm going to get these last few pieces done. I'm not going to run the camera just because, well, it's the same thing. I'm sticking bark to the piece using gator glue, and I'll be back when I come to the next stage, which, as I say, will probably be the terrain, scenic terrain material, and I will probably not do the cutting on camera because it'll be really noisy and smelly, and I'll probably do it downstairs. So anyway, onwards. This is all dry now, and I'm very pleased with how the rock face is going to look. It is still quite delicate. That will get fixed by the next couple of processes, so don't worry too much about that. What I've got to do now is I'm going to take this downstairs, going to take my Dremel, and I don't know how much you can see of that, but it is actually a little bit overlapping, particularly badly just along this section here. I don't know how well you can see that. It's hard for me to see the camera myself, so let me just maybe move that around a bit. There we are. So this section here particularly is just a little bit overlapping. So what I'm going to do now, get my Dremel, going to smooth that off, cut that off so it's at the same level as the board underneath. And then I'll be back up to slap some black paint all over the cliff and do my idea about the border of the actual where this thing that sits on top sits. So I'll be back very shortly in your time and in a few minutes in mine. Hopefully it won't take very long, when I'll be doing the painting. That worked well. Dremel did a great job. I love that tool. So we're now on to the next step. Now painting is not the next step, I was wrong. I'm going to need to do all of the Luke's APS's before I put any paint near this. So the next step, and the most important step, is going to be to make sure that when we put this top piece on, it sits very nicely and doesn't get and doesn't have any of Luke's APS's or anything of the terrain coming over into where that wants to sit, which is then going to make it sit unevenly. So let me zoom in and I'll show you how I'm going to do this. What I've got is I've got my favourite dressmaker's pins. I use lots of these, and the technique that I'm going to use involves dressmaker's pins and a ball of string. Now if you've watched another of my recent videos, the vlogs where I'm making the terrain to be used for remote gaming, you'll probably guess what I'm about to do. But basically what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to go around and I'm going to gently push in a dressmaker's pin all around the outside of the model, as you can see. So I push them in around the edge of the piece. I'm not going to do all of it actually, I'm just going to do half of it first. So make sure it's completely set exactly where you want it to, because after this point there's no real going back. So I'll get that done. Maybe don't put them in quite so close, and angle them outwards so that you're able to lift the model out again, because these aren't going to stay here obviously. Okay, I've got about as far as I can get and you still see the shot. So I will now pause the camera, finish doing this and bring you back in for the next step. I have dressmaker's pins all the way around the edge now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this model out the way as carefully as I can. There we are. And I'll just pop it over here. And now comes what I hope is going to be the magic bit. Hopefully, we'll see. So the idea is that I'm going to take some PVA glue and I'm going to run this all the way around the string, around the outside, as you can see, of the pins. And that then will act as a barrier, and I might do 2 layers, so I might put this on once and then when it's dry put another layer on. But that will then act as a guide that I can shape, as you can see, around curves and what have you, and it will mean that the model above will sit in and the terrain, the scenicking can come up to that, and it will then not go over it, and I'll be able to paint this black so that it's not unsightly. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab my PVA, I will pop some music on and you can watch as I do this. Okay, so this is now dried, so what I can do is very carefully pull out these needles. There will be a little bit of pulling on the thread when I do this. Now I'm not too worried about that because I'm going to be reinforcing the string with the Luke's APS modelling compound, so as long as it doesn't pull out too badly, which I can ensure by just having my finger near when I pull the actual pin out, then that's fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to go around the entirety of this and remove all the pins. So I'll get that done now. There we are. We now have no pins left around the edge. So if I now get this, let's just make sure that the actual existing model fits in okay within the bounds, and it does. It does. It's a little bit too much there, but that's going to be fine. So what I need to be doing then is when I do my model and compound, which is going to be next, I need to make sure that I go up to but not over this line, and that will achieve what I need to achieve. So I'm going to get myself ready and I'll invite you back for the next step, which will be putting the modelling compound as much of it as I can get on in the time that I have available. I'm going to put the camera on and run it, but I'm not sure for how long, because this is going to take quite a long time, and applying the modelling compound is something which I've shown a fair few times. But I will quickly show you how I make a mix that I like. And you've got to bear in mind that right now it's 30 degrees or so in here. Let me grab my thermometer and show you. This is my indoor thermometer. Yeah, it is currently 30 degrees, I don't know if you can see that. So it's warm here. So I have to make this a little bit wetter than I would normally, because it's not winter anymore. It's just one of those things. I make small batches when I'm working with the APS. I don't make a big amount, that's probably too much even there. I'm just not a big fan of having it overloaded and having to go dry while it's in my mixer. So I'll put a little bit into a container, and then I'll add a little bit of water. And I don't actually measure really, because I'm looking at a consistency that I know I like, which I'll do a little bit wetter, like I say this time, just because of the just because it's it's really warm. It's warm today. It's a warm day. Window open next to my workbench, and I've got a warm breeze blowing in on me, which is really pleasant. Don't get me wrong, but it does mean this is going to dry quick. Hopefully, because this particular batch that I'm mixing from, the one that I've had in this pot, hasn't done me very well recently. It's stayed wet, and it hasn't really seemed to want to go off. And I must admit, that reminds me, I was going to see if there was more plaster. No, it all seems to be consistent. I don't know, maybe it's just a bad mix. Anyway, so I mix it up, and I've made that a little damper, a little wetter than I normally would. And then I'm going to start applying it. So, yeah, that's how I do it. The big aim for this particular load that I'm doing now is to start going down in behind the bark and filling in the gaps, which you can't really see from that angle, unfortunately, because I put the camera for wide. But I'm basically trying to get in behind the bark so that it supports it and reinforces it, and means it's not going to get damaged or knocked or whatever. The other thing that I'm going to be doing with this is going up and around the edge of the string which I've glued down. So that will be the edge of all the terrain and scenic I'm going to do. What I will do is I'll get my black paint, and I will paint inside the line all black, so it has some so it's not blue foam basically, so when you take the other building off the top, it doesn't look horrendous. So I'm going to get stuck in with this now. Stop talking, I'll probably turn the microphone off, put some music on for you, and I'll get as much as I can done, maybe before the batteries run out. I'm not sure, but I'll just keep it running, and I'll stop it when I think I've shown enough. But this is going to be a long process, which is not going to finish quickly. This bit here I need to be really careful of, because I could easily make it so that I couldn't fit the piece on top back in, because there's actually not very much gap between where the other building, the white tower goes, and where this new cliff is. But I do need to reinforce it, so I might do this with clay later, but for this time it'll be good enough to squeeze in some of the Luke's APS modelling compound to act as a bit of a kind of reinforcer. So I'll stop muttering now, because that's all I'm doing. That's what's going through my mind. Fill that gap, make that one nice. Don't go over that line. Right, onwards. I got it done. That took me about an hour and a half or so. I did leave the camera running for about 20 minutes, but it was just going to be boring, and I probably wouldn't have even bothered to show it you because it would have been too long, a speeded up section. So there we are. It's done. I'm going to let that dry now, and I'll bring you back for the next stage. There's actually still a tiny amount more of the Luke's APSing that I need to do. I need to turn the board upside down and fill underneath the bottom of the cliff where there's some gaps there. But I'll get that done, show you what that looks like. I might bring you along for that as well. And then the next step will be painting the cliff. So I will definitely bring you along for that. The Luke's APS modelling compound is still a little bit greasy to the touch. So I think that is still the case of what I was experiencing previously. But what I'm going to do now is the next step on the cliffs, because as part of this specific video, all I'm looking at doing really is the cliffs and the rocky ground. That's the subject. So in the limited time I've got, I'll probably finish this build not as part of this video. So anyway, so what I'm going to be doing now is painting on black paint over the entirety of the cliffs. Thick black paint. Now, I know that not all rocks should necessarily have black paint as their base, but in this case I'm tying it into the build that sits on top, and that was done with black. So what you can see here is I've got a relatively large brush because it doesn't have to be accurate at this, and this might end up having two coats, but for now we're going to just cover the whole thing with black. And what you might need to do is do this and then come back and with different angles of light just look to see if you've missed anything and go in there with some nicely watered down black paint to fill in the gaps, because what we're doing with the black is we're putting shadow on basically. It's not going to end up being black, it'll end up being quite grey and light with other different colours in there as well. It doesn't take long, so nearly done already. As you can see, I'm making a right mess as well. I'm watering my paint down quite a lot so that it can get into all the cracks. But I'm also not worrying too much about being all that accurate, because like I say, there will be at least one more coat done to this. And also, I don't have a huge amount of time right now. I'm supposed to be going and getting in the shower to go out. But if I get this done and leave it to dry, then that redeems me a few minutes later in the day. So let's get this all painted. There we are, one coat of black paint done. Black paint's dried, and I have actually decided to leave it with just the single coat as it happens. So what I'm going to do now, and I thought I'd do this a little differently to what I've done in the past, is I'm going to focus in on just this area here for the filming, and I'll do the rest of the model off camera, just so that you can see a little bit more in detail how I go about doing this process, which is what I'm going to do here is going to make these rocks look really, really realistic. That's the idea anyway. I've said that now, and now I've got to. So what I've got is I've got my dark grey paint, which is what I normally use, and I'm going to do a heavy layer of the dark grey. So it's not going to be a dry brush. So what I'll do is I'll actually switch this to manual focus. There we are. So now it won't hunt when my hand comes in. How about that? I'm learning. So it's going to be quite a heavy one. So it's going to leave the absolute, leave the crevices, the deep parts. I'm not going to dig into those. But the rock is going to have this as its basically its colour. That's how quick that is. So I'm now going to get on and do the rest of it, which won't take me very long, wait for it to dry, and I'll come back with the next step very shortly. This is dry now, and so the next thing I'm going to do is a very light dry brush of my lighter grey, just over the top, just to pick out the edges. And this is where I'm going to depart from the classic dry brushing, because I want to pull some interesting colours into this and make it look amazing. So if you can't be bothered, this is the way you can stop, and it does look good with just the black dark grey, light grey effect. It looks nice. In fact, it looks wonderful. It's just perfectly good enough. However, I want to bring some more interesting colours into these cliffs, and so once I've finished doing this over the rest of it, I'll be back to show you how you can add orange, red and purple and all sorts of interesting colours to really bring out what real cliffs, what real rocks look like. So I'll get the rest of the piece dry brushed and I'll be back in a second. Now for the fun part, and this is where less really is more, so be very, very cautious while you're doing this. Let me first of all show you the colours I've got. So here you can see I've got a bright orange, here you can see I've got a bright yellow, I've got a purple, and I've got a pink. Now I also will grab my raw umber, so my burnt umber even, which is dark brown, and I have another couple of colours. Let's bring them over. So I'll have my Winsor & Newton dark brown, and also here we have a turquoisey colour. And what we're going to do is we're going to really, really carefully dry brush in and also create a wash with the brown. So I'm going to do a wash with the brown and I'm going to dry brush the rest. So I think I'm going to do the dry brushing first and then apply the wash second. So the way that I use these is I take the lid off, I give it a good shake and then I take the lid off. And that gives me enough in the lid for me to do what I'm trying to do. So it's a classic dry brush. You don't want very much paint on your brush at all, so have yourself a cloth and take most of it off, and then for these you just want to put it in a few places just to add a bit of variation and tonality to the rock. So you don't want to be putting too much on at all, and you don't want to be putting it everywhere. Okay, you'll barely see the effect, but trust me, it's there. So what I'll do now is I'll just announce the colour I'm about to dry brush and just go for it, so I won't pause between anymore. We have the sheep going past, and our dogs have just noticed them and are not very happy about it. There we are, that is looking absolutely wonderful. Very, very pleased with that. Now let's do a little bit of the blue turquoise. And finally, we're going to do a bit of a dry brush before I do my wash of the brown. That now looks like a really interesting rock face. So I'll make a wash up and then we'll apply that, and then I think we're done. I've done a little bit of experimentation with the wash and I've decided against doing it. It works really well if you're using plaster and something that's absorbent, but on top of the bark it just runs down, it doesn't look very nice, and it actually just washes away the dry brushing. So I'm not going to do that. I'm very pleased with how it looks. Let me do a quick pan so you can see the rest of the rock face. I think it looks really, really nice. I'm very, very pleased with how this has turned out. I'm a big fan of the bark technique anyway. It gives a lot of natural look and it looks brilliant, and it's really easy. It doesn't take long at all. So I'll wrap that up there. That's done. I'm not going to do the rest of this build on this video. I'll do that as part of my normal vlogs. It's not really what this video is about. So that's that done, and I will now do the final steps on the official build, and then this video is complete. So yes, excellent. The final stage on this is something which Angela suggested that I do. So I'm going to give it a go. And that is, I'm going to use this brown wash which I mixed up and I didn't use for the other build. And I'm just going to apply it very, very lightly to these bristles, just to give them a little bit more of a natural look, because they're a little bit kind of monochrome, And wouldn't you know, she's right. So there we are. They're very, very, very delicate. I'm not a big fan of this in my terrain. They are basically, I reckon in a year then these won't even be there because they'll have fallen off. But there we are. It might be a better idea to use hot glue to stick these down, but then you're going to end up with a big blob of hot glue at the bottom. Right, there I just add a little bit of variation and variety to the colour on that, and I'm going to call that one done. So there you are, another video done, and I really enjoyed that. I did hope to get the advanced different build totally completed this time, but with work starting and then me having to go away for work, it's just taken all the time out that I have available. So I'm pleased that I also made the decision to cut back and to not stress myself, because yeah, this is a hobby. Those cliffs do look great, and what I would like to say again, and I don't know why I'm always surprised, but maybe I'm a bit slow to pick things up, the official build really has come out very well. It's such a simple technique, and they don't take any time at all. I did that entirely in one sitting, basically, with a little bit of drying time and then the flocking, but everything else, all there was the waiting a couple of hours for some glue to dry and carry on. Absolutely brilliant technique, and I would recommend very highly that you give that a go if you haven't tried, or if you're a little bit nervous of terrain building. This is a really good starter. This is a really good basic build, very, very easy to do, that you don't really need any materials for or any tools. Kitchen knife, bit of XPS, some gravel and stones from the garden, and you're done. Bit of black paint, job's a good one. So really enjoyed that. I'll sign off now, as I always do, by thanking you very much for watching these videos, and saying if you are not yet subscribed, don't forget to subscribe, ding the bell and click all so that you are informed by YouTube when a video goes live. And last but very much not least, please do stay healthy, stay safe and stay well.